Here's a name you probably grew up with, even if you haven't thought about it in years. True Value, the hardware store, the red sign, the place your dad or your grandfather went on a Saturday for a single bolt and came back an hour later with a bag of stuff and a story. That company has called Chicago home for 78 years. Since 1948, older than the interstate highway system, and a few days ago it announced it's leaving, packing up its corporate headquarters and moving to Fort Wayne, Indiana, a city a lot of people couldn't find on a map. And the easy version of this story, the one that's already all over the internet, is high-tax Illinois drives out another company. And look, that's part of the backdrop, and we'll get to it honestly, but that's not actually why this happened, and if you stop at that headline, you're going to miss the more uncomfortable thing underneath it. Because the real reason True Value is leaving tells you something worse about Chicago than a tax rate ever could. If you like stories that follow the money instead of the noise, hit subscribe and stick around. That's the whole point of this channel. Okay, here's what happened. Let's get the facts down first because they matter. True Value was founded in Chicago in 1948, originally as Cotter Company. It picked up the True Value name in the 60s and spent the next several decades as one of the biggest names in independent hardware. The cooperative behind thousands of those local, family-owned hardware stores that aren't a Home Depot and were never trying to be. Then in 2024, a competitor bought it. A company called Do It Best, a hardware cooperative headquartered in Fort Wayne, Indiana, with close to $6 billion in annual sales. They acquired True Value out of bankruptcy and suddenly owned both brands. And this month, they made the call. They're consolidating one headquarters for both companies, and it's going to be in Fort Wayne at a campus called Electric Works. The move wraps up sometime in 2027. Indiana's governor showed up to the announcement and said, roughly 100 jobs are expected to land at that campus. He called it a big win for Indiana, because for Indiana, it is. And here's the detail that stuck with me. True Value's headquarters in Chicago is a high-rise sitting 2 train stops from O'Hare Airport, prime location. And the company that owns it now looked at that building and looked at its own building in Fort Wayne and decided the center of gravity belongs in Indiana, not Chicago, Indiana. Now here's where I have to be straight with you because the loud version of this story gets the why wrong, and getting it wrong actually lets Illinois off the hook. The official reason for this move is not, we're fleeing Illinois taxes. The official reason is consolidation. Do It Best bought True Value, and when one company owns 2 brands, it doesn't want 2 separate corporate headquarters, 2 leadership teams, 2 of everything. It wants one roof. The CEO said it plainly. Now it's time to bring it all together, one headquarters, and that will be in Fort Wayne. That's a normal, boring, completely defensible business decision, and I'm not going to pretend it's a conspiracy. It isn't. But sit with the choice for a second, because that's where it gets interesting. When you're merging 2 headquarters into one, you have to pick. One city keeps the jobs, one city loses them. And the acquiring company was based in Fort Wayne, so there was always going to be a thumb on the scale for Indiana. Fair. Except, Chicago is Chicago. It's a global city. O'Hare, the talent pool, the corporate infrastructure, the train lines. On paper, if you were building a hardware headquarters from scratch and someone offered you downtown Chicago or downtown Fort Wayne, a lot of executives would have taken Chicago without blinking 20 years ago. And this company looked at that matchup and went the other way without much hesitation. That's the part that should bother Illinois. Not that a merger happened, but that when a merger forced a choice between Chicago and a mid-size Indiana city, Chicago didn't win on its own merits. The gravity has shifted, and taxes, cost of doing business, and the general sense that Illinois is a harder place to operate. That's the environment that shifts gravity. It doesn't have to be the headline reason. It just has to quietly tilt the table every time one of these decisions comes up. And lately, it keeps tilting the same direction. Let's get out of the boardroom, because there are real people inside this. When Do It Best bought True Value, there were hundreds of employees working at that Chicago headquarters. Hundreds. And here's the line from the reporting that I keep coming back to. The impact on those employees and how many jobs the move actually creates has not been confirmed. Read that again, because it's quietly brutal. Not everyone gets to move. Not, here's your severance. Just unconfirmed, which means right now, today, there are hundreds of people who work at that high-rise near O'Hare who don't fully know what happens to them. Some might get offered a move to Fort Wayne, but think about what that offer even means. Uproot your family, pull your kids out of school, sell your house, and relocate to a different state to keep a job you already have. For some people, that's an adventure. For a 45-year-old with a mortgage and a kid in high school and a spouse with their own career, it's not a promotion. It's an impossible math problem. And the roughly 100 jobs the governor of Indiana is celebrating, those are Indiana's win. They are not automatically the same jobs. A headquarters consolidation doesn't port every desk over one-to-one. Some of those Chicago workers are going to end up not moving, not relocating, and not working there anymore. They don't show up at the press conference. Nobody stands at a podium and reads their names. They just quietly become the cost of a center of gravity shifting across a state line. And here's why this one lands harder than it would on its own. Because true value is not walking out of an empty room. Think about who's already gone. Boeing moved its headquarters out of Chicago. Caterpillar left. Citadel, the giant hedge fund, pulled up and moved to Miami. Tyson Foods, name after name after name. A slow parade of headquarters walking out of Illinois over the last several years. And now, the Chicago Bears, the Bears, in the city for over a century, have been moving toward a stadium project just across the border in Indiana. True Value joins that line. And here's the part that should sting the most for Illinois. It didn't leave for Texas. It didn't leave for Florida. It left for Indiana, the state literally next door. You can drive there in a couple of hours. That's not a company chasing palm trees. That's a company crossing one state line and finding a better deal close enough that its own store owners can still drive to headquarters. When companies leave for Texas, a governor can say, well, they wanted sunshine and no income tax. We can't compete with that. When they leave for Indiana, that excuse evaporates. Same weather, same region, same Midwest. The only thing that changed is which side of the border you're standing on, and what it costs to run a business on each side. When your neighbor keeps winning the companies you're losing, that's not bad luck. That's a scoreboard. Now let me argue the other side honestly, because I don't want to sell you a story that's cleaner than the truth. There's a real case that this move says very little about Illinois. This was an acquisition. Do It Best is the buyer. Do It Best is based in Fort Wayne, and buyers almost always pull the acquired company back to the home base. If a Chicago company had bought an Indiana company, the gravity might have flowed the other way, toward Chicago, and Indiana would be the one losing the headquarters. That happens all the time, and nobody calls it a referendum on Indiana. So you can fairly say, this is just how mergers work, and reading a grand political message into it is a stretch. Illinois officials would also point out, accurately, that the state still has enormous corporate strength. It still has more Fortune 500 headquarters than most states. It still has O'Hare, still has the talent, still has the financial sector. One hardware cooperative consolidating after a buyout does not by itself prove the state is collapsing. And Indiana being a lower-cost, lower-wage state cuts both ways. Cheaper for the company sometimes means less earning power for the workers. Cheaper isn't automatically better for everyone. Those are all legitimate points, and I'll give them their full weight. But here's why it still doesn't fully let Illinois off the hook. The individual story is a merger. The pattern is a trend. You can explain away any single departure. This one was an acquisition. That one wanted lower taxes. This other one wanted sunshine. But when you line up Boeing and Caterpillar and Citadel and Tyson and the Bears and now True Value, and they're all walking the same direction, at some point, the excuses stop explaining the pattern. Each leak has its own reason. The boat is still taking on water. So let's come back to that red sign. 78 years in Chicago, and now it's Indiana's. Here's why a headquarters leaving matters more than the job number suggests. A headquarters isn't just desks. It's where the decisions get made. It's the executives who sit on local charity boards, the corporate donations to local causes, the prestige of a city being the kind of place a national brand calls home. When that leaves, the city doesn't just lose a building near O'Hare. It loses a little more of its gravity, its ability to be the obvious answer next time a company is deciding where to plant itself. And the honest takeaway isn't, taxes did this, because that's too simple, and you deserve better than a bumper sticker. The honest takeaway is a question. When a company had to choose between Chicago and a mid-sized town one state over, Chicago lost, and it wasn't even that close. You can tell yourself that's just how one merger shook out. Or you can notice it's the same direction everything else has been walking. Whether that's consolidation or climate almost doesn't matter to the worker near O'Hare staring at an unconfirmed future. Either way, the job is leaving, and either way, it's crossing into Indiana. So here's what I want from you. If you live in Illinois, or in a state watching this same thing happen, tell me in the comments, do you buy the "it's just a merger" explanation? Or does this feel like one more car in a very long train heading for the exit? Because I go back and forth on it, and I want to know where you land. If this made you see the story underneath the headline, stick around. That's what we do here. I'll see you on the next one.